Hi gang, I am in the middle of Souls to the Polls, but I'm taking this time to do a live video on our Friends Together page because something has really been bothering me the last couple of weeks, and today it just really has come to a head. And that is people defending the rights of people to have hate speech. I was just listening to a radio station where they were defending these sites like Gab and all this other stuff, and the right for people to say things that they want to say as long as they're not acting on those. Well, many of you on my page are relatively new in the last decade to my life. So lots of you have no idea the things that I went through in the beginning of the HIV epidemic, or other Friends Together went through. But I want to take this opportunity to share this with you. It's something I don't talk about much anymore because it's many years ago at this point, but it's things that not only shaped my life, it changed the way I raised my children, it changed everything about who I was as a person, and it made me question my faith on a daily basis for a really long time. When we were first diagnosed, obviously it was super early in the HIV epidemic and people were afraid. And I always got that. I understood people were going to be afraid. My parents lived in Clewiston, which was very close to where the Ray family had been burned out of their home not long before. And you know, I was cognitive of the things that we were going to face. When I made the very personal decision to be public about my status, there was a lot involved in that, but it had to be done. At that point, I thought I was going to die any time, so it never occurred to me that 30 years later I'd still be living with the decisions I made early on. But this stuff with the synagogue and the bombs and our president blowing dog whistles, in the early days of the AIDS epidemic, people were pretty overt about their hatred of people with HIV, considering everybody that had it as disposable, as gay, as a drug user, as, you know, whatever those people were. So early on, let's start when Garrett was born. So we'd been diagnosed a couple of months when it came time to give birth to Garrett, and 3 nurses refused to come into the hospital to deliver him because they were afraid of me. Now, it was the same hospital, they refused to come in the room. It was the same hospital that I had given birth to my daughter 14 months before to the day. But one of those nurses decided I was just a horrible person, that I must be some terrible person having HIV and having a baby. So she reported me to HRS. And within hours, HRS which is now DCF in the state of Florida, was doing an investigation, Child Protective Services, of whether or not they were going to take my 2 children away. Now keep in mind that I'm somebody that when people know the story, they feel sorry for, right? And as I talk about this stuff. So anyway, that being the catalyst for everything that I did the rest of my life to protect my children and to protect other people's children and to protect people that couldn't have a voice. That voice ended my marriage really quickly, obviously. Most of you know about that part. But it was the things that was happening to us that Dan just couldn't take anymore. And there are 3 stories I'm going to share with you. The first was by far the craziest thing that ever happened. So there was a child in Palm Beach County who had HIV, and they were trying to keep this kid out of the school. And so Dr. Chen had called me. She was the AIDS pediatrician for the all South Florida at that time, and had called me and asked me to attend and speak at a school board meeting with her. And so there was a ton of publicity that this was going to happen. So we knew there would be a lot of people there at this school board meeting. And so we were prepared for that. We had, you know, some of the guys were with us, and, you know, we didn't go alone or anything like that. And Dr. Chen was an African-American woman, and myself. And Dr. Rama Wara, who was an adult doctor, actually came too. So we testify at this school board meeting where people are afraid to be in the room with us. Afraid to be in the room because they think they can catch HIV from me, right? That's the context I want you to keep in mind. So the whole time I'm being asked questions, they're shouting me down. They had their moral majority shirts on. Moral majority. That's what their shirt said. And so they're shouting me down. They're all this other stuff. Well, the school board actually made a ruling that night, and it was that this child could attend school. This child eventually became a Friends Together kid. You might guess that. But anyway, that this child could attend school. And so as we were leaving the building, we waited for people to clear out. Like we waited, and we were leaving the building, and there was actually a security guard that walked out with us. And so it was the three of us and a security guard. This lady lobs a rock the size of my fist, hits me in the side of the head, busts me open where there is now blood everywhere. Now keep in mind, this is the same fool that was afraid she could catch HIV from being in the room with me, has now laid my head open and blood is squirting out. So I always think back on that day and it's almost surreal, right? But the vile stuff that came from these people actually came from a pastor, and his last name was Kennedy, and I cannot come up with his first name right now, but he had a TV show, and he actually had a list. He had a list of people that he thought were, you know, morally bankrupt and corrupting the values of South Florida at the time, and my name appeared on his list of folks. I was in the news a lot at that time because I was doing a lot in schools and that kind of stuff. And so he constantly talked in his congregation about how, you know, we were stripping away the values of our country and all this other stuff. Meanwhile, in case you're not watching this from Florida, Florida has always been in the top 5 for every STD, teen pregnancy, and HIV. So it was really always amazing to me with him. And my dad would see him every once in a while on TV say my name, and every time my dad would call me just heartbroken that this was happening. The second incredible incident that happened, the second and third incident really happened really close together. Many of you know my dad is a social studies professor, a political science professor, had been at Palm Beach Community College for years, worked in Belle Glade for years and years, and then in Lake Worth. He's also a Methodist minister. And he didn't have a church when he was in Clewiston, but he would fill in for churches all over the Lake Okeechobee area all the time. So when Dan and I got our place in Moorhaven, it was literally across the street from the Methodist Church, 299 Avenue L, Moorhaven, right on the corner. And so we decided one day, shortly after moving there, to go to church, and I wasn't feeling well. So Dan went to church early with the kids to Sunday school, and then I came over for church. Now, my father had preached fill-in in that church for years. Everybody in the Glades knew who we were, right? And it's a small country church. So we go to church, and the kids go to the nursery. They're really small. They play in the nursery. Church is over, we come home, blah, blah, blah. Later in the day, I get a phone call from, I won't name her because she's on my Facebook. She went to the Clewiston church, but she had called my parents and then called me because the minister at the Methodist church had called ladies in the church and told them they need to come sterilize all the toys in the nursery. Again, if you're really new to us and somehow you don't know, Lindsay and Garrett are not HIV positive. This was 1994, 95. So they needed to come in and sterilize all the toys. And then they needed to get a plan in case our kids came back. Of course, I was never going back. Like, that was it. There was no going back for me. However, Dan, not so much. So for a while, he went and took the kids almost every Sunday. I just couldn't don the steps of that. And actually, I know exactly when it was. It may have been a little later that. It was the Sunday of the week of the Oklahoma bombing is when it happened. And so yeah, so that was pretty big. So the next thing that happened, again, 2 major incidents involving men in power with congregations. I think most of Trump's followers are like a congregation. So the next thing that happened was there was a church in Clewiston. It was a very large church in Clewiston. And it was Easter Sunday. Someone had put our name on a prayer list in that church. Now, this wasn't a church we went to. It wasn't a church we were affiliated with. But somebody had, Dan was extremely sick at the time. And somebody had put our name on the prayer list. This is Easter Sunday. As the minister read down the prayer list, he got to mine and Dan's name. He told his congregation he couldn't ask them to pray for our health. All he could do was hope that we died quick. Now, the saddest part of the story is the lady that put our name on that prayer list, she was a wife, a mother, and a grandmother, and she had HIV. Nobody on the entire planet knew that except for her husband and my family and her doctors. She didn't even tell her own grown children the truth because she was terrified if she did. They wouldn't allow her grandchildren to come to her home anymore. So, Clewiston's a small town. It took only a matter of minutes for church to be over for my phone to start blowing up. So I'm like, this man does not even know who I never met this man. So it's Easter week, so I knew that his congregation was actually having something at the Clewiston Inn the next day. So that very next day, on Monday, I dressed up in my funeral dress. At that time I had this dress, I called it the funeral dress. It was a black dress with a white lacy kind of collar on it and super conservative pearly kind of buttons down the front. I pulled my hair up. My hair was longer then. I pulled my hair up. I put on pantyhose and I put on high heels. And I marched myself to the Clewiston Inn. And I got in line, and because the preacher was having some sort of reception line, I got in line and I got up to him and I reached out and I stick my hand out and he grabbed my hand because, you know, all preachers going to shake a hand. Grabs my hand, and as he does, I said, Reverend, leave the blank. My name is Kathy Robinson, and I'll be praying for your soul. As I'm touching his arm, patting him on the back, I figured he had to go take a wash and bleach, so, you know, it was worth that. But my friend who had put my name on that list, that was her minister standing in the pulpit, praying that the only other person she knew on the planet with HIV would spontaneously die. Where was she ever going to reach out? How was she ever going to tell her kids what was the matter with her? How was she going to get help? When you live in a small town, your church is everything. Your congregation, those are your friends, they're the people you grew up with your entire life, and they're the people you trust. What was she going to do? In her case, her and her husband actually moved, which was good because her health was not going to make it where they were. She had had a organ transplant and had contracted HIV from a blood transfusion. So her health was not good to begin with. So they moved to the coast. She died never telling her children the truth. Never. Her and her husband kept that secret. And I've lost touch with him over the years, but I can almost 100% guarantee he still never told his children the truth. The last thing, and was probably what most people would think was the most big thing that I'm going to talk about, and for some reason it is huge, don't get me wrong, it's gigantic, but part of me was just whatever by the time this happened. So the day I enrolled Lindsay in kindergarten in Glades County, Dan was again in the hospital. In those days, Dan spent way more time at Lee Memorial than he did at the house. Dan was in the hospital. We had had a thing happen over the summer. We had taken a trip on a train with the kids and gone to the Grand Canyon. And when we had come home, there was plywood leaned up against our house. And it said no AIDS patients allowed here. And so that was probably a week or two before this happened. So when it came time to enroll Lindsay in kindergarten, the day I enrolled her in school, that night, I had taken my kids back to the parents. I went to Lee Memorial, checked on Dan. That night, something, multiple someones, burned a cross in my yard. Now, it was a very clear message that Lindsay and Garrett weren't going to be safe in the school district where we were living, right? The school board said it was merely coincidental that it happened on that day. Yeah, no. My children were not going to be safe. On that note, we enrolled Lindsay and Garrett in Glades Day School in Belle Glade, which was a private school, and a pricey private school at that. And we would take the kids, Mom and Dad would take the kids in the morning, they'd ride the bus, there was a bus that they could take part of the way, whatever, you know, that's how they went back and forth to school. And the preacher from the Lake Harbor Church actually drove the school bus, and we knew Lindsay and Garrett were safe with him. So we kept them in school there for a couple of years, and then it was time to be in real school, and we put them in school in Clewiston, and my mom basically volunteered full-time in the school to make sure they were safe. It wasn't until I moved them to Lakeland that I ever really felt Lindsay and Garrett were safe. I never ever felt safe because I was always walking on eggshells, because there was always somebody saying, that's the woman. People not going down the same aisles in the Winn-Dixie as me, you know, those kinds of things. That's 4 things. There are 440 things I could share with you. But what I want to tell you is speech matters. Every hateful, horrible thing that happened to me and Dan happened because someone in a position of authority blew a dog whistle that allowed other people to think that it was okay to hurt us. If you don't think what's happening in our country right now, all the words that are being said have consequences, you are sadly mistaken. Yeah, if people are stable mind and stable this and all that, maybe they roll off the crazy things that people are saying. Maybe it just rolls off and they go, oh, Trump is just bullshit, whatever, he's just a showman. There are millions of unstable folks in our country, and they have guns. They have all kinds of other ways of hurting people, of inciting violence, of doing what happened in that synagogue. Speech matters. There's hundreds of stories I could tell you about myself. Never mind the things that have happened to the Friends Together kids. Never mind the things that have happened to my grown-up friends in other places. This is not a third world country. And yet, my friends in our third world countries are praying for us because they can't believe the things they see and hear every day that's going on in our country. Words matter. Words matter. How we teach our children, the things we say in front of them. The jackass that dressed his child up in the Nazi outfit? Are you freaking kidding me? What messages does that send? Bad politicians get elected and do bad things because good people don't stand up. It is not about red or blue. It's what is morally right and where your moral compass lies. And we cannot continue to make excuses in our country for bad moral behavior. Be the boss of your brain.